If you had to name Jesus' favourite topic, what would you say? Forgiveness? Healing? Actually, it's the kingdom of God. He talks about the kingdom more than anything else. And I suppose that makes sense, since he is the eternal king who came to establish his kingdom, the church. At the end of time, he's going to judge all of us according to the law of love he established, and welcome those he judges worthy into his eternal kingdom of peace and love. The kingdom is such a priority for Jesus that he put it right at the heart of the prayer that he taught every Christian to pray, "Thy kingdom come." The trouble is that all of us, we're all fallen and we're in need of salvation, so it's too easy for us to misunderstand what the kingdom really is and what it's really like. That's why Jesus used so many parables, images and analogies to help our minds get in tune with his mind, so that we have the right expectations about what following him is like. In today's gospel, the parables are all about growing, and they reveal two essential characteristics about life in the kingdom of God, two things that we need to keep in mind so that we can live deeply in friendship with the King. First of all, the life of our relationship with God comes not from ourselves, but from God. And that's important to remember. Think about it. Where does the power of growth in the seeds come from? Not from the farmer, it comes from the Creator. And it's the same with us. If God wasn't constantly breathing his grace into our lives, no matter how hard we tried, we'd never be able to grow in intimacy with him. Our life of union with God depends primarily on God, and we can't achieve Christian success based solely on our own efforts. Of course, the good news is that we don't have to. God is always at work in our lives, even when we're asleep. God is the source of our Christian life, and no matter how hard we try to make our lives worthwhile, without his help, we can do nothing. Second, growth in holiness is a gradual process. It takes time. If you believe Hollywood, all it takes to go from nobody to a superhero is 90 minutes. But it's not like that for Christians. We develop in wisdom, joy, courage and self-discipline only by a patient and consistent effort to cooperate with God over the course of our lives. It can be hard to accept sometimes, and even harder to understand. But unlike our culture of instant gratification and fast results would have us believe, the Christian life takes time. Building a beautiful soul isn't like making instant coffee. It's more like building a cathedral. In fact, that's a really good image. The beautiful cathedrals that dot our landscape weren't built in the course of an afternoon or even over a few years. Most took decades or even centuries, and some still aren't finished. Sometimes generations of stonemasons from the same family worked on the same building, know that they would never see the work complete in their own lifetimes. It's just like that for the growth of God's kingdom in our souls. There are no shortcuts, no quick fads or fixes. Even if you put in a few extra hours at the weekend or pull the odd all-nighter, it won't make much of a difference. Building up the kingdom of God in our lives is the adventure of a lifetime. It's our life project, the only project, in fact, that truly matters. So the growth of God's kingdom in our lives depends primarily on God and only secondarily on us, and it's a gradual process that takes time. These are the two pearls of wisdom Jesus is so keen we hear and take to heart, especially because if we're not careful, our spiritual life can become full of frustration and disappointment. The first thing to mention is that frustration and disappointment are not gifts from God. God isn't up in heaven looking at us, tapping his watch, demanding to know why we haven't become saints yet. God made us and he knows us better than we know ourselves. Like the farmer who waits patiently for the crops to grow, so does God wait for us. So if God isn't the source of frustration and disappointment, then it must come from us, and it does. In particular, it comes from our pride and our spiritual immaturity. If our prayer life doesn't produce fruits right away, if our bad habits don't stop the moment we decide to change, and if we don't understand every aspect of the Catholic faith after glancing through the catechism, We tend to slacken off in our efforts or even give up entirely, just like spoilt children. Wise Christians who truly trust in God's action and God's pace are much less likely to give in to the temptations of discouragement and frustration. Imagine a farmer yelling at the seeds to grow faster. It's absurd, and yet don't we do that all the time? Whenever we get frustrated at our slow progress or God's apparent slow pace, we're like that mad farmer screaming at the seeds to grow faster. The image of growth of plants and seeds isn't just a New Testament image. It's also how the Old Testament describes the righteous and wise believer in the Lord, the one who patiently follows God's lead, trusting that true growth comes from God and advances at God's pace. But there's another dimension to that image which today's psalm brings out. Our spiritual growth, the growth of God's kingdom in our hearts, is a truly supernatural reality. It doesn't completely follow the laws of nature, and that's why the psalm speaks of a tree still bearing fruit when it's old, still full of sap and still green. We're in this for the long haul, a journey that will lead us into eternity, and it's never too late to start. We're well into ordinary time now, having left behind Lent, Easter, Pentecost, and the great feasts that follow it. We can settle back into the rhythm of ordinary life, but this is not a season for taking things easily. It's a season full of opportunities to grow morally and spiritually. Perhaps more than that, it's a season in which we can remember to be patient with ourselves whenever we're frustrated or disappointed with our lack of holiness or spiritual growth. In a sense, if we trust God, it doesn't matter if we're not saints yet. What matters is that we're closer to God today than we were yesterday. And remember, He's the primary author of our lives and our spiritual growth, not us.